welcome to all our panelists joining us back on the stage, and a special welcome to Christine as well. So it's been an interesting hour and a half, I would say, in terms of gaining a lot of knowledge about how do we craft sustainable food solutions that can feed everyone. And that is so important for somebody like me coming from India. So in my country, there is a severe problem of food insecurity, with a population of more than 200 million people who are undernourished. And not only that, 1 in 3 children under the age of 5 are actually underweight and stunted because of this problem of malnutrition. So I understand and appreciate the magnitude of the problem and its urgency so well, and I'm so glad to be joined by all of you to discuss this further. So without much ado, let's get started in the context of risks and opportunities for both sustainable production as well as sustainable consumption. Now, Paul, I'll first turn towards you. In the developing Asia context, we know that a large part of our population is dependent on agriculture for both subsistence and livelihood. And yet these are very challenging times for our farmers because they bear the brunt of increasing frequency and severity of some of the weather-based disasters, which results in losses to our crops and livestock to the tune of more than $50 billion in the last decade alone. So my question to you is, what role can crop insurance play in the entire food value chain, from production to storage to transportation?
Well, I think this is a very important question, and while I'm obviously an advocate for crop insurance, one clearly has to say that if we talk food security more broadly, right, there are a lot of different angles one has to tackle the problem. Food security and insurance go hand in hand, and so crop insurance is clearly a very important element in that. And if we now look into Asia and potentially the smallholder farming communities in Asia that are dependent on crop insurance, I think the farmers are supported in different ways and they link with each other. So say, first of all, it's around the financial stability of the farmer. So really making sure that in case of a calamity, if there's a huge shortfall, the farmer continues to have an income, continues to be kind of farming, and this financial stability really then also allows the farmer to have easier access to credit. Now that's fundamental because if they can take out credit, it allows them to invest in technology, into new machinery, which will kind of increase the sophistication of their operation, ultimately increasing the yield, really kind of making sure that what we have heard today numerous times, that the yield increases on kind of the limited land that we have available for production agriculture. And one last point, I think, which has to be stressed is obviously climate resilience and adaptation. And I think as insurance, we have a kind of steering function in terms of bringing farmers to technologies which kind of do take into account a changing climate, because obviously we have to set insurance conditions, so premiums and rates, depending on kind of the weather trends that we observe in those regions. And if a producer kind of has to kind of pay more and more premium in order to kind of sustain a similar agricultural practice, they have to rethink the practice and potentially change either cultivar or seed type to a seed type which has lower vulnerability to a specific event, and that way kind of lower the cost that they eventually have to spend on insurance.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I'm glad you brought up the topic of technology, because my next question is based on this technology factor. So last World Food Day, Swiss Re Foundation pledged its support to improve monitoring tools as well as climate-ready smart technology adoption. So what are some of these digital technologies that we can leverage, for example, to improve risk assessment in the context of crop insurance?
So one kind of technology I would want to highlight here, and I will try to remain brief in order to let the others speak as well, but really remote sensing. Remote sensing is nothing new, so it is there since the 70s. So the Landsat satellite, the first one was used, was already kind of launched to monitor crops from space. But what has changed is, especially in the recent, say, 10, 15 years, the abundance of both public and private satellite data set that allow to track crop development from space has, increased by 100,000 potentially times. We now have really the ability to track crops daily with super high spatial resolution. And this enhances our understanding of the risk really on a field level, and is a great addition kind of in this palette of data sets that we have available for risk assessment.
Thanks, Paul. I think I'll move around in sequence. So, Alexandra, I'll turn to you next. So one of the statistics that kept getting called out today, earlier Nico mentioned also how we need more food to be produced, possibly 50% more food than we are currently producing by 2050. At the same time, there is a lot of food that is already being produced that goes to waste because of various reasons, such as it could be droughts and floods, or it could be diseases and pests as well. So my question to you is, how is Syngenta helping or promoting crop protection?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very relevant question. Many people don't know that crops can actually get diseases. They can get infection by fungi, they can be attacked by insects, and there's competition with weeds. And everybody who, for example, has a family garden here in Switzerland, where we are today, and you didn't pay attention to your garden this summer for 2 weeks, you know what weed growth is. Yeah, I mean, this was massive because of all the rain. So this is a matter of fact, and farmers need to protect their crops, that they are high yielding, and they need to do the right things at the very right moment in time. It's a toolbox approach. It's not a one-size-fits-all. When I link back, Paul, to what you said, remote sensing, we can meanwhile see certain soil-borne diseases through satellite imagery where they are present and where they're not present. So we can very precisely inform farmers, you know, there is a need to apply a certain fungicide on soil-borne diseases, or there isn't, because we don't want to overuse these solutions. Nobody wants to overuse antibiotics. We don't want to overuse pesticides. They're very precise, precious technologies which need to be only used when they're really, really needed. We now, when a drought is coming, when the soil is drying up from remote sensing, when we might need to apply a certain biostimulant to help a plant through that drought. So this linkage of input technologies together with remote sensing information will make crops more resilient, and this toolbox needs to be available to farmers if they are large or if they are small. How farmers can finance access to the technology is different. Large farmers, in good times at high-price crop cycles, they have the means to invest themselves. They can be helped with insurance. Smallholder farmers need more the hand of government to help them adopt these technologies and understand them. So I really think this toolbox approach, making toolbox of different technologies available to all farming systems, I think that's what really is important to protect crops against disease and weather events.
Yeah. Thank you, Alexandra. When you were speaking earlier, you also spoke a lot on productivity and that those astonishing stats on how productivity could be improving by 300% while the arable land is only expanding by, say, about 25%. So my question to you is, what are some of the innovations and agricultural best practices that you've witnessed that really help our farmers improve yield?
Yeah, no, that's very powerful, because there is more than just inputs and digital technology. We understand so much more about different cropping systems nowadays. What crop rotations you need. It was always a good practice, even in the medieval age. But how can you optimize crop rotations? How do you ensure that your land is never drying up, is never heating up to keep soil fertility? And how you make such a crop rotation system, sometimes with livestock integration, economic for farmers. Because there is a lot of good science out there, but then having this economically available for farmers is just what we are starting to understand. And there also the financial sector plays a huge role, because changing a cropping system is a multi-year endeavor. If farmers get insurance and financing only for a season, how can they take the risky steps of changing a multi-year cropping system change? So I think there we need more solutions, there we need more public-private partnership to not only help large farmers who maybe can afford this risk, but especially the smallholder farmers who work on degraded land to drive forward more regenerative agricultural practice with changing cropping systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Alexandra. XiuLing, I'll now turn to you. So you've already spoken about how Nurasa is doing some really excellent work in terms of providing nutrition solutions to everyone, which is accessible, adaptable, and affordable. But really interested to know what is the role that a collaborative ecosystem can, really play in order to craft sustainable food solutions for everyone.
Thank you very much. This is really a very good question, and it's a very difficult one because it's the food system change. For people in this room who have worked in this food and agriculture industry will know that it's much more difficult than change compared with like IT, like AI adoptions. It's very difficult because we're very selective. We are all consumer, what we eat. Right. So many times we think about in the media is about what my mom cook, my grandma cook, rather than what the future food look like. So that's a challenging part of a sustainable food adoption. So when we focus on the sustainable nutrition, because we need to focus on what matters to the consumer before we really brainwash them in terms of, you must be responsible for the environment, because that's not the way how we make a food choice. So the sustainable nutrition approach is really to put consumer in the center of the sustainable food transformation, and then to make sure we introduce solutions to meet their needs. I think that's what I personally think that's a lesson learned in the last 2 to 3 years in terms of the plant-based industry that have started with very high expectation. However, with only few selective regions that being able to move ahead, and highly related to the consumer awareness acceptance. So we take that as a learning from that, and then to make sure that we really center around the consumer. And we are the one, as a new company, the beauty of a new company is we can create a solution that tailor for the future needs, because we don't have the burden of the past. And Singapore also doesn't have the burden of complex agriculture system. So we took advantage of these two weaknesses typically as right? So every organization, we took our weakness advantage in terms of how we move things forward in a very fast and agile way. And then create a platform, allow each parties that can impact, including early the two a presenter from Singapore, actually, we work with them very closely and then look at the very critical path in terms of to the adoption. So the journey just a start. I would not say we have done enough, but we feel like we are getting the right tractions to make sure that safety, food safety is seriously researched and studied before we introduce new things into the system, which is Nanyang Technology University. Their Future Food Safety Center work with us very closely. And at the same time, we're also working with partners to reduce the cost, because cost actually is, for the Asian consumer, price is number one consideration in their mind. So we must give them an affordable solution. Of course, insurance, and also all the other technology. I think my fellow panelists here are the great work they are doing, and we will help them to be introduced to the consumer. So make sure that we really supporting those more advanced in terms of the sustainable solution to consumer as fast as possible.
Thank you, XiuLing. I think it's important to be not constrained by the burden of the past, as you said, and also to have a very agile approach. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm wondering that, piloting some of these great ideas that you talk about in a lab is relatively easier, but it's a different ball game altogether to scale up and commercialize sustainable food businesses. And increasingly important too, I would say, because I remember Alexandra put up some stats on China achieving near self-sufficiency in food, India almost there. But at the same time, trade statistics say that some of the fastest growing economies in India, be it China, India, or even Singapore, they are still net importers of food commodities. So what are the challenges that you see in scaling up and commercialization, and how do you think we can overcome these challenges?
I think that's spot on in terms of the hard work. I would call it as the hard work. Right? The venture investment or the startups, when you get the high valuations, get the funding, everybody knows about how much is more valuation, didn't say how much actually revenue you will generate. And we think we need to put all the innovators, put them down to the ground, make sure you actually can feed it to the table of the consumer. Mm-hmm. And that part of the hard work probably with VC approach or investment alone will not be easy to achieve. So we are actually, the way how we work, Nurasa is creating a more blended approach in terms of we have hired a group of industry experts, have the operation experience to reduce the operational risk. As you mentioned, in the scaling side, it's very different than the lab. We need to have people to operate in a larger scale operation, understand the process technologies, understand the go-to-market, understand all these building the channel partnerships, and also at the same time, we need to find a right model of the funding into this scaling approach, and also bring retailers and bring regulators to the same table, and we provide facts to them. Facts being agile way of, earlier I mentioned about Singapore market, we said is a Singapore landing or launch pad. It is a quick, I would say a quick and dirty, but a reliable enough approach to assess the risk. Investor in this room all knows that risk is something you really worry about it. Mm-hmm. And then the more we can, at least for people to be able to measure the risk, then the investment will go to the sector that really can help them to accelerate. So I think we don't mind to do the hard work. We really don't mind, because there are so many people like-minded. They just need to find a place that we can do the hard work together, and we share the hard work a little bit. Then it's very affordable hard work to move that forward. So I would say the collaboration. Singapore just a smaller ecosystem, but we also need to make sure that the work that we are doing can spread out and find the right connections and quick and faster, including in India and Southeast Asia and in Europe as well. We also have partners in Europe and in North America as well. It's even though it's nascent, but I think when we build these nascent connections, use their compound effect, use a simple mathematical approach, that effect is quite fast actually.
Thank you, XiuLing. And I think all three of you have touched upon the risks when it comes to sustainable production. Now let's also move a little towards sustainable consumption, because we are all aware that there are risks in consumption as well, arising out of the adverse nutritional transition, which could result in increasing burden of diseases such as obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and various cardiovascular complications. So Christine, turning towards you, you've recently authored a GADE survey, which was very interesting. And two of my takeaways based on the statistics that you put out there is, one, some consumers do not have sufficient awareness related to sustainable diet. And secondly, environment still remains a low priority when it comes to making food choices. So how big would you say these problems are, and is there a workaround around them?
Well, yeah, we like you said, we conducted a survey with Swiss citizens, so I cannot speak for Asian consumers, but here in Switzerland we saw that the top priority when it comes to food choices is taste, nutrition, meaning health, and price. Environment, climate is very, very low on that list, so people care about tasty, healthy, affordable food. But we also asked them how often they take into consideration health and the environment when making food choices. So health is on the top of that list, with like 3/4 of the people said that they always care about their health. About 84% said that they also care about the environment, which is significantly lower, but still half of the people at least care about the environment, which I think is good news. There's a lot of room to improve, but then we also we built in a little quiz into the survey to find out what people actually know about sustainable consumption. And of the 5 questions that we put in, only 17% were able to answer 4 or 5 of those correctly. So the sustainable food literacy is really low, which shows that people, they try to eat more sustainably, but they lack the knowledge. Yeah. They're trying, but they don't know how to do it. So I think one of the workarounds would be to increase awareness of the effect our consumption habits have on our planet, on the climate, and start them young. Like, go to schools and include education about environmental issues with children, because they understand it when you explain it to them, but you have to give them the opportunity to learn it.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And I think two of the parameters that you mentioned out of the three, taste and price or affordability, those are possibly the parameters because of which we tend to move towards more unhealthy food, junk food, highly processed food, because they are easily available, because they're also affordable. But at the same time, as Samuel spoke before, as all of you touched upon, there are now novel proteins, plant-based alternatives, which are also less susceptible to disruptions in the protein supply chain, I would say. But is the low availability as well as the high price of some of these sustainable food choices, such as alternative proteins, the main deterrent towards mass consumer adoption?
Survey says yes. We asked people what would help you to consume more healthy and more sustainable food, and the top answer was price, followed by clear labeling, meaning that people don't really understand what is healthy and what is sustainable, because the information that they have is so huge and confusing, sometimes even contradicting. And then it's also about availability and like the choices that they have. And when we looked at that, we were quite surprised, because all these hurdles that they face, they're systemic. It's not something that people themselves can influence. As a consumer, I cannot influence the price, the availability, or the labeling. So this means that the food system itself has to change, because people, on one hand, they're trying to eat more healthily, but they don't know how. And then there's also these issues that they see, that it's too expensive, it's confusing, and not everything is available. So it's a mix of a lot of contradictory factors that you said. And it's interesting you say these are systemic issues which we really can't influence, but we also know another thing that we can't influence very easily is possibly consumer behavior. And I know earlier in the day, Nico mentioned about those 16 insects getting legitimized for human consumption in Singapore. By the way, some of the list includes crickets, grasshoppers, silkworms. So you might just get sushi garnished with silkworm larvae. So my specific question is that, how in a world where it's so difficult to influence consumer behavior, and elsewhere in the world, what Singapore has done may be viewed with some amount of skepticism, that I would not want to eat silkworms or crickets or grasshoppers. But the point is that how do we really use the principles of behavioral economics in order to nudge people towards sustainable food choices and also towards reduction of food wastage? I think one factor that you have to take into account is food culture, because just because it makes sense doesn't mean that people want to eat it if it's not something that they're used to. For example, here in Switzerland, we also have 3 species of insects that are have regulatory approval for consumption, but it's just people don't grow up with insects as food. Yeah. It's something that's crawly and yucky, and you don't want to touch it. So it has to make sense in a cultural context as well. And I think one of the, at the same time, easiest and most difficult solution would be application of true prices. So meaning that it's not just the production cost, but also the environmental and the social costs, so that we need to pay what a good actually costs us as a society, as inhabitants of this planet, meaning we also need to include loss of biodiversity, climate change, social issues, animal welfare. And if we calculate the prices like that, then all these animal products, all these junk foods that you mentioned, would become way more expensive. So people wouldn't eat them as often as they do today, which is usually too much. And fresh produce, especially healthy products, environmental friendly products, should become more affordable.
Yes.
So I think that was automatically change the way that we eat, and also because it has a bit of a higher price tag, people give their food more value, which I think would lead to less waste, because a carrot or an apple, suddenly we know the value of that product, and we don't want to just throw it out. Or maybe that's very naive, but I hope that this could be one of the solutions.
Yes, and I think that's a proven phenomena in economics. We call it the Veblen effect, where you associate high price with high quality. So maybe psychologically we will tend to waste less and value our food more, as you said.